After some time away, I've decided that I'm going to begin the series again on Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. We were left off on Rule 3, that is, do not hide unwanted things in the fog, and today we're going to look at the rule number 4. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. Although many people, considering Jordan Peterson's background as being amongst the rather capitalist intellectual dark web, may think about this in a purely capitalistic way, that is, and with an emphasis on business and innovation in monetary matters. This really applies to every single thing that you can possibly imagine. There can be opportunities with people, there can be opportunities with family, there can be opportunities for your own growth outside of the context of money. But when people talk of this now, they're usually thinking about, well, how can I innovate technologically so that I can profit monetarily? So, rather than cover that today, I'm going to speak a lot more about when it comes to virtue itself, or just generally improving things that aren't just the number of zeros on the end of your bank account. This is one of those fields where I actually think that having a good grasp on philosophy is more important than having a good grasp on technology or any of the sciences that inherit from philosophy. Because the great strength of philosophy is that while it does give you a good lens in which to view reality, it also provides you with the tools to ask questions. Because you're dealing with needs here, fundamentally. You're analysing the needs of people, and you're analysing things about the reality which can be utilised in order to provide a more pleasant way of living, or to provide a more enriching kind of living. And so, I think that if you're going to start exploiting this Rule 4, one of the things that you should do is get your hands on some really, really good philosophy and have a framework in which to interpret the world that isn't just what you're taught in schools. Because almost universally, from what I understand, and it's certainly the case with myself, what was provided by the schools was not sufficient to really interpret the world as a whole. And if you want to be able to exploit opportunities, you're going to need a better understanding of the world. It is particularly important to study those philosophers who didn't reject the existence of things in themselves. That is, to have an idea of the realist philosophers. These would be people like St. Thomas Aquinas, Plotinus, Plato, Aristotle, and many, many others. Because these frameworks are fundamentally a lot more interested in processing the reality as considered on its own, whereas other ones, like idealism, generally start with human thought, and that leads to a number of problems which aren't really relevant to the video beyond saying that there should be more of an emphasis on realist philosophers in studying this. Now, when you go through thinking about this realist philosophy, you will begin to notice that human beings have needs, and that the reality around us, in a certain sense, has needs. Now, to a capitalist, it is very obvious that there are the natural needs of people. And when I say capitalist, I don't mean the ideology, I'm speaking about anybody who runs a business. There are natural needs that human beings have. For example, there is a need to dispose of waste. A great amount of money is generated by the processing of waste materials. Everyone needs to eat. We have farms. But I think that, considering the aim of this video isn't so much to look into those things, we're going to talk a lot more about psychological needs and spiritual needs of people. Because these are ultimately the things that direct man. They are the highest things that man possesses. And they are ultimately some of the major things which structure the society around us. And that's something that needs focus as well as some place that you can get not only material profit from, but also profit in other ways. Let's consider an example in our society. The fact of the matter is that the majority of people in our society are not as constant in what they are doing as they could be. They are, in a sense, effeminate. They decide to pursue pleasure over those arduous goods that they could be pursuing, which actually are more valuable. Now, it may not be clear that there's a financial market for this, but there is certainly opportunity that lay in providing a means for which people can develop their constancy at tasks and to develop patience. Now, how this would be exploited in any particular way, I am unclear, but this is an example of a place where you could take an idea. This is why I think that one of the best ways to consider opportunity is to have a very good idea of what people's needs are, what people's virtues are, and what their faculties are, and then consider the good as obtained by those things, and then think about how you can obtain a greater sense of that good, and also how you would deploy it in such a way as to make it more easily obtainable or to make it more palatable to people at large. Christianity was not a religion that was just completely obsessed with reading the Bible alone. It was never just reading. It was also preaching. It was also prayer. It was also meditation and discussion, which grew the faith. And that's because it's very hard to read scripture, and it's very hard to not talk and to discuss ideas and then truly develop them. There's no way of really testing ideas for their logical validity if you're just trapped inside of your own head, for example. This can be applied to almost any other faculty. And so we must consider how people can be expanded out in this way. This is a great opportunity that could be pursued. So, therefore, in short, this process is mostly about considering the good in context of human beings or whatever you're trying to improve, and then exploring the means by which you can grow that thing. And if you can see that nobody has tried the thing before, or it's being tried in a way that lacks a certain perfection that you think you can give to it, then by all means exploit the opportunity. As for where responsibility has been abdicated, I want everybody here to do a little exercise. Please write down how many actual responsibilities that you have right now, generally considered. Now, if you're married and have children, this is a very obvious one. If you are a priest or a consecrated religious, this is a very obvious one. But when it comes to, single men and single women, they don't really have much in the way of responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist. In Catholic theology, there is the concept of the state of life. And in line with that, there are certain responsibilities which people must take up. Now, of course, there are very basic responsibilities, praying for 15 minutes a day, going to Mass on Sunday if you can, provided there isn't any extenuating circumstance, and so on and so forth. Not sinning. But there is going to be more than this for people's lives dependent on where they are. And so, I think that alongside the consideration of opportunity that I've just given, detecting where responsibility has been abdicated is a very similar process. You sit down, you come up with, say you choose a particular profession, and you consider the state in life of that person. You sit down and you consider what things are missing for the perfection of that particular role, and then from there you point out the problem, because there's a chance that there will be something that many people have missed. And that is where the opportunity lies, as Jordan Peterson says. Let's consider a very esoteric example. With databases, there is a process of dividing them down so that they make more sense and operate more efficiently, called the normal forms. These take in the sets of attributes in a particular database table and split them down into other tables so that they make more sense. Now, it is the case that often a database will be produced that doesn't in fact align with these standards, and they're very hideous and very difficult to maintain. Now, you could assist with that particular problem by providing some sort of tool of automation which handles normal forms for database managers. So you might have tables that are perhaps 300 fields across unnecessarily, and some sort of automation tool could split these tables down, preserving all of the data into various new tables to make them easier to manage and easier to read, as well as easier to document. This is an example of something that could really help with the responsibility, a responsibility that I think is occasionally ignored by people working with databases, to keep the databases understandable to people who come later. And this could be solved by some kind of tool or some kind of development process that builds this in at the very beginning of the process of making the database. In short, I believe to really find these abdications of responsibility and to exploit these opportunities, what is fundamentally required is a very detailed philosophical view of the world that considers the reality of things independent from what is being taught in schools and what is being taught just through the lower level subjects that are dependent on philosophy. And that through this consideration, there will be many holes and many opportunities discovered. You can't exploit an opportunity unless you find the abdication of responsibility. And therefore, I bring it to a close on that note. Thank you very much for watching.